Okay, we're recording. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's Jfokus Brown Bag. Today it's me that hosting together with Niklas Finne. Hey, Niklas. I was telling that we're recording the session, but the Q&A will not be recorded. Today we have with us Shaaf that will do a presentation on Quarkus. So welcome.
Perfect, thank you. So let me let me start by sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay, you can tell I don't use Zoom every day, so just bear with me. Perfect. So my name is Shaaf. I'm a technical evangelist at Red Hat. I work with product management, so I work with Quarkus, Vertex, some of those runtimes that Red Hat ships as Red Hat runtimes, and you can run them on Kubernetes and et cetera, et cetera. Today, I'm going to talk about Quarkus, and I'm going to talk specifically around developer joy, how you can create your applications, how you work with Quarkus, generally, like how do you develop your applications, what is live coding, and then of course, if I deploy it on something like OpenShift or Kubernetes, how could I do remote development with that as well, which is also interesting. I'll explain that in a bit as well. And of course, there's a lot of other things that I could also cover, but what we'll do is a quick presentation for those of you who do not know Quarkus, and then we're going to jump into live coding. And then, of course, in the end, we'll have question and answers. So, excuse me, I have a bit of a slight allergy, so you might find me doing that a little bit. Sorry for that. Architecture and choices. So if you look at Java in general, Java is old, if I must say, or older, or has been there for a long time, which is awesome. And I could say about myself that I started coding with Java when it was Java 1.1. And if some of you remember, there used to be Java applets and all that kind of fun, and Java Web Start. I've been through those hoops as well. And so Java has had a long life, and from that perspective, there are many things that have changed over a period of time, and Java keeps on changing. But I think from an architectural choice perspective, if I look at the most recent, of course, we can go further back from the monolith as well. But a monolith app is like an application server like JBoss, requires your application requires maybe a couple of gigabytes of memory, and has a couple, a startup time could be seconds or minutes, for example. And as we go further towards, time, we can see, there has been microservices, there's event-driven architecture, there's serverless, and these requirements have changed. Like it's changed from not being in gigabytes of memory, but maybe hundreds of megabytes. Startup times need to be better. Why? Because if you're running your application and you need to be like a microservice, and you need to be highly available, and you need to be quick, and you need to be scalable, you need to have, for example, fast startup times as well. You need to have other things, of course, like 12-factor and more architectural practices as well. But it's important for applications that are running Java to be able to adapt to cloud, right? It is, yeah, sure, it's cloud native, it can run in cloud, but can it actually be in an environment where it can succeed, it can scale, it can be spun down, et cetera, et cetera. And most recently, serverless. And in serverless, if you look at time periods or life cycle of a serverless function, could be minutes or could be seconds. Well, it could be more as well in some use cases, but generally it could be minutes and seconds. And of course, the memory is short, but at the same time, the serverless functions are done, let's say, maybe in a reaction of something. So something changes, you have a serverless function coming up, and it does certain, unique things like, administrative stuff in a single sign-on server, or in your cache, or in your in your e-commerce shop, for example, or play with the sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be many ways you could deal with that. And of course, the lifetime is much more smaller, since it just does a specific function and moves on. So when you look at Java from historical perspective, Java was not made in this kind of fashion initially, right? There is garbage collection, there is JIT as an example, and there is performance as an application runs longer. And that, of course, is not the case with some of the current scenarios as we see in cloud. So how does Java adapt to that? And that has been a challenge for the last couple of years, and question marks across many different, architectural choices that will be taken. And of course, okay, and of course, if you look at serverless, and sorry for this survey being a bit old, but just to make the point here is, the Java, of course, when it comes, for example, serverless runtimes, hasn't been up there in the sense you can see Node is there, Python is there, even Go is up there, right? Because they have been able to do these things without tying themselves or having that understanding of a long-running application as Java has for years and years, optimizes that process. But of course, when it comes to just very short times, fast startups, Java has not been able to deliver for a couple of years, and hence the term which I've seen actually every time I've been working in Java is dead, right? But it's not dead, it's still there. Well, if I hit Google, I got I guess that's 49 million hits or something, which was interesting, a revelation. But yes, so there is this sentiment of saying, hey, why use Java programming when you cannot actually maybe do something like serverless in a fashion that the other languages or runtimes are doing, right? So enter Quarkus, and Quarkus is trying to answer that. And of course, Quarkus is not just trying to answer that by itself. We've worked with Quarkus for last couple of years. I think it's about 2 years now. And we saw that there are many ways we could optimize Java framework or to make sure that it is faster, it is smaller footprint, etc., etc. And Quarkus came through that sense. But then, of course, we also use GraalVM, which you might be aware of, which is to optimize even the native parts of Quarkus. So Quarkus just doesn't do native optimizations, but it also does the JVM optimizations to make sure that it is smaller and faster as well. Some of you might ask, what is Quarkus? Quark being the elementary particle, and us actually being the hardest thing in computer science, right? So that is what Quarkus means. And of course, we want to make sure that Quarkus can solve problems for us. And number one, of course, which I'm going to talk about today, and of course do the live demo as well. Hopefully the live demo will remain live and we will be able to see all the stuff. So what is developer joy? I would say that's one of the pillars of Quarkus. And what we're talking about is live coding. So you're able to code with your applications and change them as you are doing that on your development machine, as an example. You're able to deploy them easily onto environments like Kubernetes and OpenShift. You're able to look at stack traces in a much more meaningful way. There's some developer UI as well. You can also do remote development while you're in your desktop or your laptop, and you can remotely deploy your application, for example, in Kubernetes, and also kind of work with that. So I could have like a Kubernetes cluster like OpenShift, and I could have my application code on my own machine, and I can do everything on my own machine while as everything changes in let's say Kubernetes over there. So some cool, interesting functions there. Of course, deployments of serverless functions as well, and much more. Recently in the alpha release, we are also working on something called continuous testing. I'm not going to be demoing that right now, but it is also something that you could actually do testing the same way you do live coding. So if you haven't seen live coding, just wait a couple of minutes and we'll get there, and I'll show that to you as well. So developer joy is one thing that we are looking at all the time, to how to improve that experience, also in relations to other languages. So if you have any thoughts, if you have any feedback, then we're very open to having feedback and looking at what we can optimize as well. So Java is fast with Quarkus, as well as GraalVM. So stating the same facts that I spoke about earlier, you could have a traditional, simple REST hello world kind of an example, and you could have A cloud native stack, does something like 130, 140 megabytes of memory, as an example. Whereas with Quarkus, running on OpenJDK, no native compilations, just optimizations, you can do it in, let's say, half of that, right? Or 73 megabytes. And then, of course, you can go towards native, and native, of course, is 12 megabytes. Now, what is the difference between the JVM mode and the native mode? Of course, the native mode does not have the same features as you would have for a garbage collection, as an example, for a long-running application. So you could use the native for example, serverless. So Quarkus, from a developer joy perspective as well, has those bindings within, let's say, your Maven, that you can generate the native binaries, and you can deploy them onto a container or an operating system or into Kubernetes as well. And with JVM, of course, it's more long running. So that's how you would distinguish between which ones you might want to use. So if I look at a REST and CRUD example, similar again, the numbers go a little higher, but of course, Quarkus is still very effective and efficient there as well, meaning that you can use the same use case. And of course, you will add more extensions. Quarkus has the concept of extensions, where you can add functionality like Postgres database or reactive database and stuff like that. So as well. Now, these are some of the startup times. Like I said, I mean, when you're doing cloud, you're deploying onto the cloud, you may be doing a REST, you may be doing a serverless function. You want to make sure that your application comes up fast, right? So Quarkus, of course, with JVM is also quite fast. So you have 0.943 seconds for a REST application. You have like 0.016 seconds. That's for the native one. So it's really fast when it comes to native as well, and it will help you to deploy your serverless functions with ease as well. And of course, Quarkus also have extensions for Lambda, AWS Lambda, Azure Functions as well, and for Google as well. So that's not part of the demo today, but definitely something that you could look in if you were super interested in doing that. This, of course, changes, right? I've heard people saying, "Hey, my application takes like 8 minutes to come up." Now, that's, of course, when you're working with cloud and you want to scale and you want to be taking the advantage of it, then, of course, it becomes a problem for many applications as well. The third benefit for Quarkus is it unifies imperative and reactive. So today you might think, hey, I want to do a reactive application, or part of my services should be reactive. You would typically create, a different project, different Maven projects or artifacts for it. But with Quarkus, it actually has the core of Vertex. So Vertex is sitting under it. Vertex is the reactive toolkit for developing reactive applications in Java. And Quarkus uses that under the hood, which means that in Quarkus, you can create a REST endpoint that is reactive, and you can create another REST endpoint within the same application, which is not reactive. Quarkus handles them both together, and it's awesome for event-driven apps, right? So it gives you that possibility to, for example, using Kafka streaming as well with your reactive applications. It becomes a super nice experience. Best of breed frameworks and standards. This is I would say it like this: lots of extensions out there, whether you're using Camel, whether you're using single sign-on with Keycloak, MongoDB, Prometheus, Grafana, Micrometer. There's a bunch of extensions out there, and you can also write your own extension as well, which could help Quarkus to add that functionality for you as well. And of course, why would you write an extension? You might even ask yourself. So with Quarkus, of course, optimizing this, optimizing reflections, the code paths, the dead code elimination, et cetera, sometimes you might have an application that has so super heavy on reflection that you can actually not able to optimize it without removing some of those reflections. So in that case, you could create your own extension as well. But there's a bunch of them. I think there's like 300 plus extensions out there already. Okay, so that was quick and good time. So let's jump into the demo part. So if you've seen code.quarkus.io, so I'm just gonna do this again, code.quarkus.io. This is where you could generate your project, your application. I have an IntelliJ environment as well. So let's just say here, I go a new module. I also have the Quarkus extension. So I could typically also create this. And I could also say, hey, I don't want to use code.quarkus.io. I might have my own server URL, which is possible, that I would want to use for my Quarkus applications. And I could then generate the project here. But just for the nicety of it, I'm gonna switch back. But also just to tell you that there is a plugin for IntelliJ for Quarkus, but there's also for Visual Studio Code, and you can also use it in Eclipse. The Visual Studio Code one has a little bit of different experience, and the one in IntelliJ is different. I usually use IntelliJ for my development, so I'm kind of familiar and happy to show that. VS Code is also quite nice, but you don't generate projects every day, so at the end it's just a Maven project, right? So let's just say I create an application. I call it D3 because D2 and D1 were working, so I'm gonna call it D3. And then of course I could say, hey, I want to have REST easy, so I have REST easy JSON B. I could use maybe Hibernate. So I want to use Hibernate ORM. And of course, here you will see that there's this experimental preview, et cetera. There's tons of them, right? Let me show you a bit more. So if you're a Spring developer and you want to use some of the Spring extensions, there's a bunch of Spring extensions that you can also use with Quarkus. They are, of course, in preview. They're all, of course, some of them are experimental, but they are for you to try it out with Quarkus because you could use them too. So I've used Hibernate, I've used REST Ajax RS, JSON B. I think those are good. I could also add something like an OpenShift extension, but hey, I need a Postgres extension for, let's say, my driver. So let's say we have D3. So I generate my application. You can push it to GitHub as well, share it, whatever, right? So, but I'm just going to do a download as zip. This is going to put my project in my downloads folder. So I move into my downloads. Here's my d3.zip. I'm just going to copy this one here, take it to my demos, and paste it out here. So here, if I look in the project, there's the Maven wrapper, the POM XML is already generated, and then there's some source files. So let's just open this in IntelliJ, and I'm going to show you what it has. So module from existing sources. Since I didn't generate through IntelliJ, I have to go through this, but let's just do that. I was too fast in clicking. Sorry about that. Just give me a sec. Okay, D3. So we have D3 and open some Maven project and finish. Okay, my IntelliJ is behaving a bit funny. I think that happens in all demos, so we'll do it again. That's D3, open, finish, perfect, thank you. So here I have my Quarkus project. There's a bunch of code that's already generated. There's a greeting resource test and a native, native greeting test, since you can also compile into native. I'm not going to do that today in this demo. Here's the greeting resource. So if I go into my directory here, and I do something like mvn Quarkus dev, and that's going to start up my Quarkus development mode, as I would say. Excuse me. So that's going to start my Quarkus development mode. Now, interestingly enough, something funny is happening here is that in Quarkus 1.12, I believe, we added something called the dev services. The dev services, basically what it does is it reads that if you already have an extension, like a Postgres extension added in your project, it will spin up a container, which means that now I can actually just code with my container. So let's see, when my environment started, it also started a test container. So we have a test container integration, and it works with Docker at the moment, of course. And that is my Postgres database. So what's happened is that it efficiently understands, okay, you are trying to create an application which is going to require a database. So why do you need to create it separately? I can do it for you. Well, you can switch it off, but it's a super cool feature when you're developing, and you can also use this in your testing. So Quarkus Dev Services will do that. It's here you can see that it actually starts the container for Postgres 13.2 and runs it through, right? So that's awesome. Now let's just take a look at what other things that Quarkus has in terms of development as well. So here's my standard application, startup application. There's something called, I also have something called Dev UI, right? So Dev UI, pretty cool also, gives you lots of options just to look at it. Of course, this is only for the development. If you deploy this in production, it's not going to be available. And I'm going to show you that as well. But tons of properties. So in case you don't want to go through documentation and you just want to see all the properties that you can use, you can also browse through here quite quickly as well. And then of course the rest of the things that you might want to see in case you wanted to, you will also have that through Dev UI. The interesting thing is that all extensions, as they're added, they will also pop up here. So if I just went out here and added an extension, like for example, again, let's go to D3, and I'm going to run an add extension command here. So Quarkus add extension minus the extension is OpenShift, which is the extension to deploy applications, let's say in an environment like a Kubernetes environment, that in this case we use OpenShift. If you're using Kubernetes, you can also use a Kubernetes pure extension as well. So you could do that too. So this will add an extension. While it does that, of course, here it will also load that extension as well. So here you see that it loaded that extension while you're developing. So you don't need to stop your application, restart it. You just basically just adds it. So if I go here onto my Dev UI, I will see, hey, I have a container image extension and an OpenShift extension. And I could do a bunch of things. I can build my application here, as well as, I can also deploy it to an environment like OpenShift. So some interesting, cool features there that you can see that it's not just about how you're live coding, it's also that it keeps on pacing as you are doing it. You don't have to restart it, and you keep on adding extensions, working through it, and you would do, well, the world is not perfect. Sometimes it might fail as well, right? So there is always going to be an element, but it's nice and robust and stable that it doesn't do that. It doesn't do that very often, right? So let's go to some of the coding part here. So I'm going to try and create a Java class here. I'm going to call it to do. Just checking time if I'm doing perfect on that. I hope so. And to do extends, let's say, Panache entity. Panache is the Hibernate framework that you can use with Quarkus. You can also use your active record pattern if you wanted to. You can have a repository as well if you wanted to. But in this case, I'm just going to do a simple, just a simple PowerShell just to show you how that works. So I'm going to make sure that this is an entity. So it actually is persisted. And then, of course, let's just add something like public string title, public Boolean completed. So I'm creating a to-do list, right? So it has to have a title. It is either completed or not complete. I could also give it an order, and of course I would maybe want to have a URL with it, right? So these are some of the basic things I could do with my basic entity. Let's just add some functions as well. So public static list, to do, and of course find not completed, and then we return list completed, comma, false, right? So here what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, tell me the tasks that are not completed, and I'm going to be a bit sneaky, and I'm just going to, do the paste. I guess all of us sometimes do that. and I'll say find completed and turn this to true. Awesome coding skills here, but bear with me. Then of course, I could do a delete completed as well. So, just remove some of those items that might be, and of course, this again, coming from the Panache entity class, I can make sure that they are removed once they are completed. It's a simple entity, but hey, there's a small problem, that I can spot. I want to say this is not blank, so the title should never be blank. I want to say that this column is unique, and of course, if you all have worked with SQL, you would know that the problem in order is that might be a keyword in the database. So let's just say, hey, we want to name this and we want to call this something else. So we're going to call it ordering. So it doesn't bother us, right? So perfect. We have that Pojo here. Looks good, I think. Just checking on my other screen as well. And I think it's telling me that it's not unique. That's okay. And then what I would do is I'll create a to-do resource and just make sure that I can actually call it through my REST endpoint. So add produces. Here I will do media type. So, give it a media type. So what it is going to be, I am saying it's going to be JSON. And then of course consumes, also the same. And perfect. So now let's create a get method. And the get method, we will try to make sure that maybe we can get all. So we do public list to do get all, hang on. And not doing all the hoops of checks and balances here. Okay, I lost my focus here. Okay, so return to do, that's the Pojo list all. While I do that, I can get all of them, but maybe I want to do that in a certain order. So let's do sorting, which is also part of the Panache framework, and we say sort by, and we order it by the order column. So now it should return a to-do resource to do that. So let's hope that I am correct. If I go here, awesome. Okay, I missed something. Okay, hang on. Of course, return. How would it do it otherwise? So interestingly enough, Quarkus will also tell you, hey, you missed something. You haven't done it correctly. Go do it again. So I fixed that, and hopefully that should work. I know I have missed something else as well, which should be the application properties that I should tell it at least to generate my schema. So let's do that quickly. Should be Quarkus, hibernate, generation, drop, and create. And maybe also we can do Quarkus dot hibernate and log SQL equals to true. So we can actually see what's going on. I go back here, and here I hit my API. So it tells me that, hey, what are you doing? There is no endpoint like API. So it lists all the other endpoints I have. So what did I miss? I missed in this case, I missed my API endpoint. So let's do a path and call it API. And let's go back and say, hey, do you have API? Oh, yes, I do. Perfect. So this way you are just coding as you're going along, and you keep on doing all of this, and it just works quite simply. And this experience helps you to do live coding as you're going along, right? So maybe make this, let's make this a bit more interesting. I will show you that, I have an OpenShift environment here. I've cheated a bit. I've already deployed a Postgres database here, since, test containers don't necessarily deploy here, but I have this, namespace. This is a Kubernetes namespace. It's called, Shaaf, shaaf-dev. I can see there's an application like Postgres already running. And what I'm going to do is, since I added the OpenShift extension, I'm going to try to deploy this into this Kubernetes environment. And then I'm going to start to change things from my local environment, so you can see that, hey, this happens there as well. So let's do that. And for that, I have a bit of a cheat sheet here. So you'll have to bear with me a bit, because there's a bunch of settings that I need to enable. Let me show you what those settings are. Main resource application properties. So I need to enable my dev mode. I need to say that, we'll launch my application in dev mode. I need to give it my URL, which is basically where my application will be deployed. And then, of course, deploy it there. I'm just going to mark some of my production elements here, because I don't want to go to production yet. And I want to deploy this. So let's just take this and put it in my application properties. Sorry, cheating a bit here. And what I'm basically saying, set these environment variables so you can use my application. And Quarkus knows that, hey, if dev mode is true, this application is going to run in dev mode. And what I've also done is I've put dev services to false, so I don't need to use my test containers in my OpenShift environment, right? So I can just do it here. So if I do mvn Quarkus, clean, compile, and deploy true, now it's going to create this mutable jar, which I am talking about here, and it's going to deploy it into my OpenShift environment. So it's going to build this, and it's going to start to create a stream inside Kubernetes, and create an image, and then deploy that image into OpenShift, which you can do this similar with Kubernetes the same way as well. So here you can see it's using OpenJDK 11, and it's going to take all my Java artifacts, put them there, and push that into my Kubernetes environment. So the build has, for example, started. I can also see that. So if I go in my OpenShift environment here, I can see that there's a build configuration going on, which is called D3, and currently it's running. So I can actually go here, and I can also see the logs as they start to come in. So here you'll see that it started to receive the logs, but since I'm on my dev machine, I can see it as well. So it's kind of building that right now. It's doing that. I could have created some config maps and or secrets, and put some of the information like database and some of the variables directly in there as well. But just for the simplicity, I have done that. I have just put them here. So if you look at my application properties here, I've set some memory variables. You don't have to, but I just do it for elaboration. I've also done something like OpenShift route expose equals to true, which means that once this is deployed into OpenShift, the OpenShift, the proxy, the load balancer would know that it needs to actually create a unique URL for it, so I can actually reach this application from outside of OpenShift as well. And of course, the rest of the properties are similar. And then again, I'm using the OpenShift database that exists in my environment already, so I can do that. So it seems like it's already deployed. If I go back on my topology view here, I can see that my application should be deployed. Hopefully everything's looking good, perfect. This is awesome. It's deployed. It is connected to the database. And also, if I look at some of the environment variables that are out there that have set it up. So here's a bunch of environment variables that we had passed to it. So dev mode is true, data services is false, right? So now I'll go back here, and here I will say mvn Quarkus. If you remember last time I did Quarkus.dev, here I'll do something called remote-dev, right? And in this case, the remote-dev, it's going to try to connect to that instance that's running, which I have basically given the route to. And then we will be connected, and I can directly create and work with this application. So it says connected to remote application server. So let's do a small test, a bad test, I would say. So I want to really make sure that I test this. So I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my JavaScript front end, which I'm not so awesome at, and I'm going to put it in here. So let's say okay. Okay, overwrite. That's fine. Usually overwriting is not good for live demos, but we just do it, right? So I do that, go to my topology view, look at my application, say, hey, open this URL. As it starts to load here, you'll see that Quarkus will start to load everything that I have changed. In this case, all the files that I put in my meta-inf, they're going to be loaded right up into this environment as well. So Quarkus is doing that. Of course, it's taking a bit more time. I'm being really brutal here, to be honest, because I'm dumping a bunch of files. With Node.js or JavaScript, you can, or Vue here, there's a lot of JavaScript files, and this would definitely trigger a timeout from the request, the HTTP request that I actually endured in the beginning. So here it deploys that, but hey, let's try it again. And if I go here on todo.html, I will see that my to-do HTML is listed, right? So here you see my to-do front end is loaded, the front end that I pasted. But hey, what about if I do something more interesting? I also take, for example, my import SQL, which is basically a bunch of already some files, and I also put it into my resource folder here. So let's do that too. Let's make it more interesting. I add that, and I hit refresh on my URL here. I can see that it's going to send something. It has sent the import SQL. And here you'll see that it's going to load all those different entries as well. So awesome. I mean, you can do all of this while you're coding. And remember, the only part of the endpoint that I have created is just the part where I do get all. I haven't created the rest of, active and completed and all of that. So let's just quickly do that as well. Again, some more cheating on my end. I think I feel very, very good when I cheat here, but I think it's good with time. I think this is the best resource. So I'm just going to copy this file here, the to-do resource. I'll explain it to you as well, what I've done here, just in a second. Let's take that, paste it here, Control S, go back here, refresh. And you will see that Quarkus is actually doing that. It is creating your jar, again, with your to-do resource class and deploying it there. So again, now here I say, hey, Jfokus Brown Bag. Oops. So I add that here, and it's added. I can say, hey, it's completed, clear completed, is going to go away. So all of this happening through my remote application. What I've of course done in my resource here is I've implemented the logic to create the application, to do the get one part of it as well, to get the details of the application for the to-do item, and delete and so on and so forth. So I've done all of that. And here, what I've continuously did from the start is basically just created an application from scratch, worked on it, with dev services, so provisioning those containers automatically behind the scenes, and then working with that. And then when I'm, hey, why not do a remote instead? I could have done everything on my local machine, by the way, but remote sounded more cool. So let's go try to do something on remote server as well. So I deployed my application on remote OpenShift environment, or you could do it the Kubernetes extension too. And basically created all the different business logic in the to-do resource as an example, while my application was already partially deployed and doing remote development like that. So stuff like that, makes a lot of sense. You could do the same with Kafka streams. So if you were working with Kafka streams, you would have your stream coming in, and you could exactly do the same thing while live coding as well, interpret the stream as it's coming in as well. So some cool functions there. So what we could do last now is you might wonder, hey, I'm going to cancel the remote dev here, but hey, I want to deploy this to production. So in production, of course, it's going to be different. In production, you will not have let's say the remote dev mode, but also you will not have something like the dev UI. So for that, I could just go back again and deploy this application this time. So let's just go here. I'm going to remove this deployment config v3 just to make sure that everything's gone. And then, of course, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to deploy this as a production environment. And then, of course, all the other dev features, they're going to be gone here. So you'll be able to connect directly, and we'll be able to see that too. So let's just quickly do that. I can see I'm actually way off time. So we can see when that comes. What I do want to leave you with is, of course, some of the other things. Like I use the OpenShift environment, which is called the Red Hat Developer Sandbox. If you want to try it out, like you want to try how Kubernetes works and how you want to work with Quarkus, you can go on developers.redhat.com/developer-sandbox and you can sign up for free. There's no binding. You'll have it for 14 days. You'll have roughly about, I think, 8 containers you can provision, so you can play around with stuff there as well. I've put in some links as well for resources, so I'll share the presentation later on as well. The demo app source code is placed here, as well as the example with Kafka streams and some details around continuous testing, because that's the next thing. The next interesting thing you would see is that you don't need to reload all your tests. Any test that has changed, Quarkus will be able to retest them while you are working. So if you're very much into test-driven development, you could actually start with continuous testing, which is in alpha right now, by the way. So you'll need to get the alpha build for Quarkus there. There's also an IDC validation report that I put in here in references, and that is basically for you, because I shared some numbers on that. So this validation report gives details around those numbers. So make sure you just, if you want to be interested in those numbers, go ahead, take a look at them, and take a look in more depth and detail around all the different features as well. Lastly, you want to look at guides, how you want to get started. You can go on quarkus.io. There's a Zulip chat, an active Zulip community. Just come in there, ask a question. There's a ton of people there, me, myself included. We will help you. And we also love feedback. So anything you see, you want feedback, you want change something, we are happy to look at that. So lastly, just to show you, the application has been deployed. We spoke a lot about how fast it is. I can of course not provision a lot of containers, but here you'll see, if I go in my resources, the applications, the containers will start and they will start to connect. And here you see that they're quite fast, started in 1.498 seconds, this particular container, and you'll see the rest of them has also started as well. So it's fast, as said, it promises that, and it has all the developer productivity as well. So at this point, I'm gonna stop sharing, and I believe you have questions. Sorry, Matthias, I think I went a little bit over time.
It's okay, I guess. So could you, would it be possible for you to copy the link from the last slide and with the references, and then you can put that into the chat?
Yeah, sure.
The Zoom chat.
Let me do that.
If that's possible. If it's too...
Well, it's possible. I can actually share this presentation as well. It's in Google Docs, so not a problem as well. So you
can send that to me, and I can post. Yeah, I can post that as a link at the meetup or something like that. That would be good. Perfect. So, okay then, let's go for questions. So everything is super clear. We're in Sweden, so we have to wait a little bit. But I think that Norman should have questions since he was evaluating Quarkus. So even if it's outside the presentation, if nobody asking questions, then go ahead.
I was prepared very good, so that only some points was new for me. A very good point was the remote dev feature that I don't know, and I will try to work with them and work with the developer sandbox. So it's a really cool feature. So nobody of the developers can